All right, so here is the second video for class 1. Let's see, I gotta go back a slide. We're talking about mechanisms, and we want to look at some basic stuff and different basic motions that we're going to be, or that could be considered. We really mostly concentrate on these two guys right here. All right, so this is the 4-bar mechanism. You could make a case that the 4-bar mechanism is the building block of all other mechanisms, right? It's the one that we will focus our most amount of attention on, and picking the different lengths. Since we mentioned 4-bar, and you look at this and you'll say, well, there's only 3 bars there, Dr. Deal. Here is the 4th bar, the ground, right? So we consider the ground one of the elements as part of that. Up here is what we'll often call the slider crank, or the crank slider. I'll start by calling it the crank slider. And we call it that because here's what most often we will have this as the input. We will crank this, and then this will be the output to the thing. We could go the other direction and call it a slider crank. And when we do that, it's because, well, the input is now going to be the slider, and the output will be the crank. There'll be some issues with that quite often, because we can get stuck. And we'll often, when trying to make that motion, when this and this line up with each other, like back down here at the bottom, when they're like that right there, it's hard to get it back and move it around the corner to come back. So there you go. There's the slider crank versus the crank slider. Sort of another version of that you can see is this guy right here, which is often called a Scotch yoke. So these are existing things, and the setup of this is slightly different from the setup of this one right here. The transition point isn't exactly the same. So if we have a constant rotation of this, or a constant rotation, I drew the opposite direction as the other guy. We have a constant rotation of that and a constant rotation of this. We won't necessarily have the same velocity, or if you want to track this motion as a function of time, right? If you have this direction right here, like up here, we'll have some type of, it's not going to be a sinusoid, actually. It's kind of interesting. That's not what, whereas this one is more of a sinusoid. This one has its own type of motion that's not exactly a sinusoid. Or here's another one right here where we have a rotational input and we have a translational output. And again, that relationship between a constant rotational speed will have a different motion. In fact, it'll, if we have with respect to time right there, we might come up, level off, and then come back down, right? So that's the idea of having an input and an output, right? If this is the input, this is the output, and those two things can vary depending on the nature of the mechanism. We have this rocking motion where a lot of times this will be the input, and then we could think of that as being the output over here. We can also put something, attach something up here, and that little point, that the motion of that point will be interesting. This is often called a coupler curve. And this thing could be a weird little shape that could be because of the proportions. But that weird shape, we might want to look up in a table, find a particular shape that we want that matches with a prescribed one, and find the proportions of this to match that, right? So that's the idea of what we're going for. We're trying to design machines and mechanisms that perform a particular motion in order to create a task, and that input versus output is the mentality that we approach onto this. This is an interesting one here because we have a motion where this is sliding, this is rotating, and this is rotating right here. And So like there's a combined motion going on right there. I won't talk further too much about this, except that this creates a particular type of acceleration that's called Coriolis acceleration, when we have a rocking and a changing length, which is essentially what this thing is doing right in there as the thing moves, as a particular type of motion because of the setup. Some basic ones we've seen before: gears, we have an input and an output, right? Or we have belts, we have an input and an output, or chains, we have an input and an output, which you would think would be the same, but if you had an acceleration and there was a certain amount of flexibility in here, this would cause the output motion to be a little bit different from the chain motion. Also, the chain motion, if you really get in detail right here, the chain, I could explain, I don't think we do this in this class, but chains actually, there's actually a little bit of a staggering motion as it moves because it's not exactly round. And if you focus in on, I don't want to go too far into this. If you take a look at the arc length and the, I'm butchering this explanation right here. But if you take a look at this motion right there versus, I'm going to draw this poorly here. I'll try to draw it like this right there. So this thing is rotated like just one half of the circular pitch, I guess you call it. Of this arc right there. So it's now in a different position. Its velocity when it's here is differently when it's velocity here. Okay, so I did a bad job of explaining that. So there's a velocity because of the motion of the chain and the nature of the sprockets. The chain doesn't move at a constant velocity. It kind of staggers a little bit. Which is going to be different from a belt. But of course, the belt, we might actually, depending on the pre-tension that we have in the belt, it might not be sufficient when it's accelerating to be able to keep with the friction of it. So we might squeal, right? So there's a different input and output behavior, even though we would think that all three of these would be the same. We have intermittent motion. This is a very common guy right here. We call him the Geneva wheel. And it's kind of neat because it turns and then stops and then turns and stops, I should say. This thing could be constantly turning and toppling, but this one will turn and then stop and then turn and then stop and turn and then stop. Same thing true with a ratchet, right? It can only go in one direction, but it's also going to be a little bit of a stutter. And then we have an escapement, which we have inside of watches and clocks. These are all different types of mechanisms. Here's some everyday examples of simple mechanisms, but we can see that we are hidden inside some of these. Here's a hidden 4-bar. You might not accept. Here is a hidden, this is a crank slider, right? So this is the crank coming down, and here's the slider coming up. Here's a 4-bar. Right in here, that's unexpected. And we've added something to the output right there. So, we step on this guy right here, and that is our output for a bass drum. This is representing an airplane overhead compartment. And this is in the open position, and then you close it. And you might have thought, well, this must just be on a hinge and go, like this right here, and it hinges right there, and it up and closes. But that would actually, it wouldn't work as well as having both this translation and a rotation of that's a consequence of having a 4-bar inherent inside there. Right, so here's like the ground, and we push right here. This is actually a slider crank right here. Here's the sliding part, and here's the cranking part being cranked by these hydraulics in. And we've extended the thing. Here is a 4-bar. Boom, 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 right there. Here is the ground bar, if you will, a windshield wiper. And we've just extended off of the end of this rocker back and forth to create this motion. All right, there's other pictures of other, like here's one where we're taking and we're moving a box. I'm not sure if we're moving from here or to there. Yeah, I think we're picking it up like it lands. It goes this moves conveyor belt moves this box when this piece is up in that position, and it will transport it back over to this conveyor belt, which will bring it along further, right? And so like maybe we have a motor that's driving that crank. You get the idea. Here's a 4-bar right in there. We have lots of mechanisms that perform functions. So they all start, though, with these very simple things. This 4-bar is fundamentally the thing where everything starts. Well, there's other mechanism examples. I don't know how long this video. The video is already 10 minutes. Here's a video of one that's a really important one. This is on the Watt steam engine, and interestingly, that right there is considered a mechanism that was designed by James Watt, so that this right here would be as straight up and down as you could possibly get, so they wouldn't have as many problems with the seal in the steam engine. And he purposely designed this to avoid his initial design used somebody else's, I think it was like a gear linkage thing, and he wanted his patent to be clean, so it would be entirely belong to him. And that's and he was very proud of those proportions, and it turns out that's the same one that gets used in a lot of trucks. Right in there. So that piece of equipment still exists today, and it's the Watt straight line mechanism. So we can continue on and on for a long time with some of these. Here's my favorite straight line mechanism. This guy is called the Hwecken straight line. So this right here is the straight line that they're referring to. There's other variations of other things that also perform this same approximate straight line. Kind of see how cool that looks right there. So and some machines, in some applications, it's necessary to have part of the linkages make a straight line. Lots of other interesting and cool mechanisms, checking out what motions can be made, and this is one of my favorite things right here. I think that's maybe it's part of the, I forgot the guy's name now. We'll see some video. I'll make sure I'll point out some videos. Strang Beast or something along those lines. I'm trying to remember his name. But he makes these really cool, practical, real wooden and sheets and little dowels, and he goes on the beach, and the wind drives these elaborate mechanisms on the beach. It's sort of like he's like an artist, architect, engineer, wizard. But those are kind of cool. All right, so do we want to say anything else? No, let's keep going with this. All right, just a little bit more. I already mentioned the Geneva wheel. Let's watch him in action. All right, so we have this intermittent motion. We also saw the ratchet back and forth, so we have that intermittent motion. I like this Geneva wheel, linear Geneva mechanism. You can kind of see where maybe that might be useful in an assembly line. These are all images that are courtesy of Robert Norton's textbook. And so where do we start with our mechanisms? We start with the linkages. Let's start the next video after this. So here's where to start, and we will go to the next video.